Hi everybody, this is Mars Hill Latin Grammar for lessons 9 through 11. This is week 3 of our summer intensive course, and we're really getting into the thick of new grammar now. So make sure you pay as much attention as you can, maybe take notes, and definitely think of questions you have if anything is confusing that I'm saying we're about to say. Let's just get into lesson 9. You'll notice that your lesson pages are already in Canvas, so if you want to pause here now and print those out, that might be very helpful because I'm just going to go through them as they are. Okay, but let's start with lesson 9. So we're doing a couple things in lesson 9. For one thing, we're talking about is, hic, illa, and iste. And these are for demonstrative pronouns. And these are going to get really difficult, not in terms so much of their declensions, which are, you just have to memorize them, but in terms of their meanings. These can get muddled up together, but we're going to do our best to understand how to use each one. Okay, so hic and ille are equivalent to this and that, respectively. So that hic means this and ille means that. They specify whether the object, the this or the that, is near or far from the speaker. But in English, we often use that to point out something in general. So I could say something like, I could speak of using that in terms of like, well, that's interesting. And I can say that, but it's not really referring to any kind of distance, or it's not even referring to a specific concrete thing. So we can get confused here. But the main thing to think about here is when I want to say something is close to the speaker. For example, I'm holding this book. I would say this, hic, this book. But if someone's sitting across from me and I say I want to refer to their book, I would say ille, so that book, the one that's far from me. Okay? Okay, then there's the situation of pointing out something that's near the person spoken to, which in Latin is expressed with iste. Iste is also used to show contempt. Obviously, none of these forms can really be used in a meaningful way without context. The important goal is memorizing the forms and the basic meanings so that we can recognize them when reading. It's one area of Latin that's even more difficult, these demonstrative pronouns. So more difficult than Greek. So just get ready for it to be difficult. That's okay. So let's talk about hic, kai, kok. I'm going to read a syntax rule. It's number 19. And I have attached this in your lesson, I believe. So 19. When his, her, its, or their are not reflexive, that is, when these words refer to something someone or something other than the subject, the genitive of the third person is used. I believe I'm reading the wrong note. Yeah, I'm reading the wrong note. I'm sorry. I need to go to 20. Sorry. Going back. Okay, reading syntax number 20. The uses of the 4 Latin demonstratives are ise id means that or those, which is non-specific. Hic, kai, kok is this or these, and it is very specifically near the speaker. Then illa, illa, illud is remote from the speaker, far away from the speaker. And then ista, ista, istud is that or those in the sense of near the person spoken to, or in a derogatory sense or in contempt, which we'll get to later. Okay? Okay, so hic kai kok means this or these, but the rest is id, illa, illud, and ista, istud are all translated that or those. Okay. The tricky part about demonstratives is that there are 3 different options for saying that or those. To pick the right one, you must pay attention to whether the object is remote from the speaker, illa, near the speaker, near to the person spoken to, ista, and spoken into contempt, ista, or non-specific, is, aid. Let's do some examples. So I could say, that plant near you is beautiful. Now that is near the person spoken to, so we're gonna pick iste. That's the one we use. Okay, I could say, these books in my arms are heavy. Now we're talking about something near the speaker, so we are gonna use hic kai kok. Here's another one. I planted those trees outside. Now that's remote from the speaker, the trees are far away, so that we would use ille. And I love this apple I'm eating. Now that's near the speaker since I'm eating it, so that's gonna be hic kai kok. Here's an example of a non-specific one that we would use with is id. Do you remember that vacation? Now that doesn't, that's not either near or far from the speaker, it's non-specific, so we're going to use id. And now you might notice that id, you already know, you know it as the 3rd person pronoun, he, she, and it. But this is another use of it, can also mean that. Okay? Okay, let's look at syntax number 21. Going back over to the back here. Okay, this is just what I just said. So you have already learned is, id as the 3rd person pronoun. It also functions as a non-specific with respect to location, demonstrative adjective, meaning that or those. We often use that and those with reference to location, more just to reference something. So an example, is puer est fortis. So that boy is brave. That's an example there. Okay. All right, let's look at another subject. So that's enough for an introduction to those words. Mostly you need to memorize those declension. That's going to be really important. Memorize is, id, hic, kai kok, ille, illa, illud, and ista, ista, istud. And we'll understand more of the uses of these as we go, as we actually practice using them in sentences, probably on Wednesday or Friday this week. Okay, but now we have to review a little bit about the subjunctive. So we often use subjunctives in a subordinate clause, which reminds us that we need to review what kind of clauses there are. So we have independent and we have subordinate clauses. An independent clause can stand alone as a complete thought. For example, we can say urbem defendunt et gens eam oppugnat. So they defend the city and the tribe attacks it. Okay, those could stand by themselves. That sentence can stand by itself. Okay, and notice that's two independent clauses there. They defend the city and a tribe attacks it. Now, a subordinate clause cannot stand alone as a complete thought. Let's give an example here. Urbem defendunt quod gens eam oppugnat. So that means they defend the city. That's an independent clause. Could stand by itself. But then we have because quod a tribe attacks it. Now, a tribe attacks it is a good, complete, independent clause. But if I have because at the beginning, that's not enough. Why do I know that? Because it would sound weird and not make any sense to just say this as a sentence. because of tributaxic. See, I can't stop there. You don't know why the because is there. Okay? So that's the difference between a subordinate and an independent clause. An independent can stand by itself, a subordinate can't stand by itself. Okay? All right. So 2 examples of subordinate clauses are purpose clauses and clauses beginning with quod. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about purpose clauses when we started learning subjunctive. We talked about subjunctive purpose clauses with ut, remember? And ut means as by itself, but it can also mean in order that with a clause of purpose. Okay? But also we know the word because, and that is quod. It's very loud, sorry. I'm outside. Wait for that car to leave. Okay, so with quod, we're going to have dependent clauses or subordinate clauses that are in the indicative rather than subjunctive like we saw with ut before. Okay? Okay, so here's another little note from page 31 of lesson 9. This is about direct quotations. In English, we use quotation marks, but in Latin, they don't have quotation marks, or they don't use them. So they say inquit, which is he said or she said. So the way that works is something like this. Nuntius agmen inquit. A tergo opugnator. So that means the messenger said, Nuntius inquit. The army on the march is being attacked from the rear. Agmen a tergo opugnator. So basically, instead of quotation marks, they used inquit, which means he says. Okay, now we have a note about the various ways that we can say and in Latin. So we have several ways. We have et, which is the conjunction by itself, or we have enclitic, que, Q-U-E, or we have the word atque, which is when you're adding this word. So that's 3 different ways to say and there are different situations in which you use different ones of these. So the best way to use et is when 2 things aren't really specially, there's nothing special that connects them in a certain kind of relationship. It's just 2 words joined by and. So for example, Romani et Galli pugnant. The Romans and the Gauls are fighting. Another way is que, and you use que when joining 2 things that are similar or parallel in meaning. So if you're giving a list of things, kind of. So, for example, milites uxores liberosque defendunt. So the soldiers defend uxores liberosque. So their wives and children. Those go together. And we put the que on the end of the second word in that case. Okay? And then atque emphasizes the word or clause that follows it. So the example here is ave atque vale. That means hail and farewell, hello and goodbye. And atque just makes it clear that the second word is important. Okay? All right. Let's move on to lesson 10. Okay. More intense grammar for us. We're going to start in lesson 10 talking about the relative pronoun. So the relative pronoun is qui, qui, quod. Okay. Usually it's translated who or which or that. But most of the time, who is the best use of it. So the declension of qui, qui, quod is very similar to the other pronouns in this unit. The stem is kua, Q-U, except in the genitive. In the dative case, is in the singular, where it's ku, C-U. So you just memorize your declension. The two most surprising features are the neuter nominative and accusative plural, quai. It is similar to hike, the neuter nominative and accusative plural of hic, haec, hoc. So it's unusual because it looks very much like the feminine in the neuter plural, accusative, and nominative. Okay. And one note here is that cum is a good enclitic that's often used with qui, quai, quod. So we have, for example, quo cum, which means with whom. Very easy. Qua cum, quibus cum, etc. Okay, here's a vocabulary note. Satis, which means enough, can be used either as a pronoun. Can be either used as a noun or an adverb. So I can say, I have enough. And that means that's the direct object there, enough. Or I can use it as a adverb, in which case I would say, are you trying enough? Are you trying enough? And the enough there is modifying, it's describing the trying. So it is an adverb, okay? That's just a little note. Okay, but on page 33, at the very top, we're gonna start there. In the sentence, the Romans guard the men who were captured. There are two clauses. The first clause is the main clause. That's the Romans guard the men. And the second clause is the subordinate clause, who were captured. And that's a relative clause, who were captured. The word who is a relative pronoun. A relative pronoun begins a subordinate adjective clause, called a relative clause, and refers to a stated or understood antecedent. The relative pronoun follows the pronoun agreement rule. Remember that the pronoun agreement rule says that a pronoun agrees with its antecedent in gender and number, but not necessarily in case, because the case is determined by the use in its own clause. So these relative pronouns follow that rule. Okay? It could also, you don't necessarily have to have an explicit antecedent. You might use qui by itself with an understood antecedent. So one example in Latin would be qui diu laboraverunt defeci sunt. So that would be those who, you imply those who, qui, have worked long are tired. Diu laboraverunt is who they worked long, and then defeci sunt is they are tired. Okay. So you might sometimes translate qui as those who, with an understood antecedent. Okay. And a note about that, the understood antecedent is those, and the qui agrees with those in gender and number, so masculine plural. Qui, it would be like saying boni, where good, that's good people, where I use the nominative plural masculine. Okay. Okay, some more notes. A relative clause is not always at the end of a sentence. So, for example, it may be directly following the noun which it refers to. So, Romani viros qui capti sunt servant. The Romans guard the men who were captured. Okay? This means that a Latin sentence sometimes has two verbs in a row, capti sunt and then servant. And to avoid confusion, you need to remember this general rule. The first verb after a relative pronoun usually goes with the relative pronoun. So the one following the pronoun itself, the one closest to it, is usually going to be not just closest to it, but following it and closest to it. That's going to be the verb that goes with it. Okay? Okay, moving on, one more lesson. Okay, lesson 11. In this lesson, you're learning the word, which is the same, okay? So that's going to be idim, eadim, idem. And the way this is formed is by adding a adding a suffix, dem, to your demonstrative pronoun, is, id. So what has been done is you just add dem to them, to is, id's normal forms, except for a couple things. So note that the forms of is ending in im, like eum, the im changes to an im. So, for example, accusative singular is eundem, not eumdem. Okay? Alright, so you learned that declension. Okay, so you have learned about purpose clauses beginning with ut. Now you're going to learn another way to do purpose clauses. So you have learned that the purpose clauses are introduced by ut, or ne if it's negative. They may also be introduced by the relative pronoun qui, qui, quod. This is called a relative clause of purpose. Okay. For example, we might see either of two things. We could see milites metit ut loci naturem exploret. So that would be this. He sends milites. So he sends the soldiers ut loci naturem exploret, in order that they may find out the nature of the place. Okay, so that's one way. That's the way you're used to. You use ut with the subjunctive. But here's the way that we're adding. Milites metit qui loci naturam explorant. Literally, he sends the soldiers who should find out the nature of the place, or in order that they may find out the nature of the place. So this is just another way to do the purpose clause, and you can do it either way. If you're using qui, you call it the relative clause of purpose. Okay? When a relative pronoun is used instead of ut, the verbs in the clauses must still correspond, and the relative pronoun still follows the pronoun agreement rule. So what do I mean by the verbs must correspond? That will turn to 52. I'm going to find 52. Okay, in a sentence with two clauses, there are two verbs. The tenses of these verbs must correspond. If the main clause verb is in the present or the future, the purpose clause is in the present subjunctive. If the main clause verb is in the past, either the imperfect, the perfect, or the pluperfect, the purpose clause is in the imperfect subjunctive. So if we have a present tense in the main clause, or a present system tense in the main clause, we'll have present subjunctive. If we have a past tense verb in the main clause, we will have a imperfect subjunctive in the subordinate clause. Okay? Also note that if the purpose clause is negative, ne has to be used. Ne has to be used. Also, a relative clause of purpose cannot be used if the relative pronoun would agree with the subject of an active verb. So, for example, let's see, Caesar contendebat ut hostes obtineret. So, Caesar was hastening to hold back the enemy. Caesar is the subject of contendebat, so you cannot say Caesar or Caesar contendebat qui blah blah blah. One way to know that you are dealing with a relative clause of purpose is if the verb in the relative clause is subjunctive. So if you see a subjunctive verb following qui, qui, quod, then you will expect that there's probably a relative clause of purpose. Okay? Okay, one more note and then we'll be done for the day. We're getting a little long here. Latin and English both have 3 different words for where. We have where, whither, and whence. 1, 2, 3. Where, whither, whence. Okay, where means, or refers to something in a spot. Okay? Something that isn't moving. Whither is describing a motion away, and whence is describing a motion toward, from somewhere else. So whither could be reworded to where, and whence could be from where. Okay, so 3 different senses. Now in Latin we have ubi for the first one. Ubi is where in the sense of a stationary thing. We have quo for whither or to what place, and we have unde for whence or from what place. And quo and unde are much more common in Latin than whither and whence are in English. Often the most natural translation of quo and unde is to or from what place, or simply where. But you cannot use ubi to mean whither or whence. All right, and one more vocabulary note. So the word causa means cause. And if you use the, you can use it as a preposition, if you use it as a preposition, you put it in the ablative, causa, and it means for the sake of, okay? So causa, or custodis causa, means for the sake of the guard. And whatever the object of the preposition is in that situation is going to be in the genitive. So this is an example of a preposition that actually takes the genitive case rather than what we're used to it taking the ablative or the accusative case. Okay, that was a lot. I will happily explain that all again on Wednesday, as much of it as we need to go over again, and we will try to get some grammar questions in there too. God bless you.